On the outskirts of the Adirondack Mountains in New York State was an area almost untouched by time and civilization. People called it the Forgotten Waterfall. The place, surrounded by dense trees and uneven trails, was known for its wild beauty and the unusual stillness that hung in the air. But the calm hid a story that few dared to tell out loud. The ancient residents of the region spoke of a woman, or something that looked like a woman, who inhabited the crystal-clear waters of the waterfall. His song was as sweet as the sound of running water, but it brought an overwhelming sadness. Whoever heard her felt compelled to come closer, and no one who answered the call returned. Tommy Grayson, a 37-year-old man, carried on his shoulders the weight of a life shaped by the vastness of the mountains that surrounded the small town of Mill Creek. Born and raised there, Tommy had become a respected trail guide, admired for his courage and determination to explore even the most remote corners. However, his connection to the Forgotten Waterfall carried a dark weight. 12 years ago, his older brother Sam had disappeared in that mysterious place, leaving a gap that time had failed to fill. At the time, Sam was just a curious teenager who decided to explore the place alone. Tommy never forgave himself for not stopping him. The legend of the Guardian seemed like a folktale to everyone, until Sam disappeared. Since then, no one has ventured near the waterfall. For Tommy, the search was never over, and the mystery of the disappearance was slowly eating away at him. And before we continue with this intriguing story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps us bring more content like this to you. Now let's get back to the story. That autumn morning, the wind cut through the dry leaves with a melancholy whistle. Tommy was packing up his hiking gear in the small cabin where he lived when a group of tourists approached him. They wanted a guide to the famous waterfall. "I don't work in that region," he replied dryly, pulling the zipper on his backpack. "We pay double," insisted one of the men, a young man with a defiant look. Tommy faced the group. It was made up of 4 people, all in their early 20s. They seemed too confident for his taste. "It's not a question of money. I don't drive there for a reason. You should listen to the stories," he replied, closing his backpack with a sudden movement. The leader of the group, a boy named Carter, smiled disdainfully. "Let me guess, it's because of that guardian of the waterfall. A spirit or something? What a joke. We're here because we love horror stories and local mysteries. That's all, Tommy." Tommy stood up slowly, taking in the anxious faces. He wanted to say no, but he knew that reckless young men like them would end up going alone. And if something happened, the residents of Mill Creek would blame him for not warning them. Sighing, he said, "All good. I'll meet you tomorrow morning at 8. But listen carefully, this is no joke. If you want to venture out, follow my orders to the letter." That night, Tommy had a disturbing dream. He was at the waterfall, surrounded by the sound of low, mournful singing. At the bottom of the waters, he saw something move. It was a feminine silhouette with long, dark hair that floated as if it were alive. Suddenly, her eyes opened, glowing a ghostly hue. "Why did you come back?" asked the voice, which seemed to reverberate inside Tommy's mind. He woke up with a start, in a cold sweat. The clock said 3 in the morning. He got up and went to the window. Outside, the wind seemed to carry something different that night, a distant echo that resembled a lament. The next morning, the group arrived punctually. Carter, accompanied by Lena, a young woman with a curious look, Mike, a robust and lively young man, and Emily, who seemed more afraid than the others. "Ready?" asked Tommy, adjusting his hat. "We were born ready, old man," Mike replied with a cocky smile. The group followed the winding trail that led to Cachoeira Esquecida. At first the path was peaceful, with the sound of the forest filling the uncomfortable silence between Tommy and the tourists. However, as they approached the location, the landscape seemed to change. The trees grew denser, the air thicker, and a faintly metallic smell filled Tommy's lungs. When they finally reached the clearing that overlooked the waterfall, Lena was the first to exclaim, "It's incredible. Indeed, it was. The water fell from a height of 20 meters, forming a crystal-clear lagoon surrounded by rocks covered in moss. But there was something unsettling about the place: the absence of sound. There were no birds, nor the buzzing insects that used to be common in forested areas, just the sound of water. As they explored the place, Tommy felt a chill. Looking around, he noticed something strange. On the opposite bank of the pond, there were barefoot footprints that disappeared into the water. Before he could say anything, he heard singing. It was a low sound, like a forgotten melody, filled with sadness. "Did you hear that?" asked Emily, stopping suddenly. "Yes." "What is this?" Mike asked, his voice shaking. Tommy knew what it was. His heart was pounding, but he kept his face steady. "Listen well. Don't follow that sound. No matter what happens, stay where I can see you." But it was too late. Carter, curious and arrogant, had already crossed the bank to investigate. The melancholy sound of singing seemed to capture Carter's attention. He moved slowly, as if each step was guided by an invisible force. Tommy shouted, "Carter, come back here!" But the young man seemed deaf to the pleas. He stopped at the water's edge and stood still, his eyes fixed on the crystalline surface. Lena, scared, grabbed Tommy's arm. "What's happening to him?" she asked, her voice trembling. "That's what I warned you to avoid," Tommy replied, his eyes fixed on Carter. "Something about this waterfall holds people back." Tommy ran up to Carter, pulling him by the shoulder. "Come on, boy. This is no time for jokes." Carter blinked a few times, as if waking from a trance. What it was, I just seemed to hear someone calling me. It was so beautiful. He rubbed his head, confused. "All of you, listen up," Tommy said firmly. "No matter what you hear or see, stay away from the water. We're leaving here soon." Meanwhile, Emily and Mike looked uncomfortable. Mike tried to ease the tension. "Look, it's probably just some weird echo, right? Water, rocks. It can make funny noises." But even he didn't seem to believe his own words. Tension in the group increased as the day progressed. The singing, although distant, continued. It was almost hypnotic, like a promise of something no one could define. Lena began to question, what exactly is this guardian? Is it just a legend? Because this doesn't seem normal. Tommy hesitated. He never liked to talk about what he knew, but there, in the middle of that oppressive place, he decided to tell the truth. More than a century ago, they say that a woman was abandoned by her fiancé in this place. She waited for him at the edge of the waterfall for days, until she was found dead in the water. Some say she threw herself, others that something pushed her. Since then, people have been talking about a presence here. They call her the Guardian because she never lets anyone leave here if she feels they are disrespecting the place. That's just folklore, right? Mike asked, trying to hide his anxiety. Tommy looked at him. "My brother disappeared here. Do you still think it's just a story?" Silence fell over the group. The air felt heavier now. Even the sound of the waterfall sounded different, almost distorted. At that moment, Emily pointed to the other side of the pond. "There's something there. Do you see?" Everyone looked in the direction she indicated. Behind the fine mist created by the water, there was a silhouette. It was clearly humanoid, but something was wrong. The contours of the body seemed to blend in with the surroundings, as if it were not completely solid. Carter, despite Tommy's warning, began walking again. "Carter, for God's sake, don't go!" shouted Tommy. But Carter, ignoring everything, said, "What if it's someone who needs help? We can't just leave." As soon as he took another step, the chanting increased in intensity. Lena and Emily covered their ears while Mike murmured, "This can't be real." Tommy rushed to hold Carter, but the young man seemed rooted to the spot. When he finally pulled it back, something unexpected happened. The water on the bank began to bubble, as if it were boiling. Everyone backed away, and the figure they had seen disappeared. "We're leaving now," Tommy ordered, pulling Carter tightly. As they returned to the trail, Lena asked, almost crying, "What if it follows us?" Tommy didn't respond. He knew that there were things that could not be avoided. Suddenly, a loud noise made them stop. Something crashed through the nearby trees, and the group turned to look. It was a deer, but it was completely disfigured, as if it had been drained of blood. Lena screamed, and Mike started looking around desperately. "What's going on here? Is this some kind of joke, Tommy?" he shouted. "Shut up, it's no joke. We need to get out of here," replied Tommy. The singing began again, but this time it was closer, as if the guardian were between them. Emily grabbed Lena's arm. "I said we shouldn't have come. I warned you." As the group ran along the trail, it seemed as if the environment itself was conspiring against them. Tree branches seemed to reach out to block the path, and the terrain became increasingly uneven. Carter tripped and fell, cutting his leg on a rock. Blood was flowing, and Tommy knew that could make things worse. "Get up! We can't stop!" he shouted, helping Carter to his feet. Finally, they reached a small clearing where they could see the sky again. The sound of singing diminished, but did not disappear. Tommy was breathing heavily, trying to catch his breath as he watched the group. "Is everyone okay?" he asked. "Good," Mike shouted. "Do you think this is fine? We're being chased by something that shouldn't even exist." Tommy tried to calm the group down, but he knew they were on edge. Before he could say anything else, Carter muttered, "I can still hear." Tommy froze. "What?" Carter looked up, and his eyes seemed empty, as if something had infiltrated his mind. "The chant is inside my head now." Carter knelt on the ground in the clearing, holding his head in his hands. His face showed pain, but also something more, as if he were being called from within. "It's in my head. I can't stop," he whispered, while the others watched in panic. Lena tried to touch him on the shoulder, but Tommy stopped her. "No, don't touch it. We don't know what's going on." The group fell silent as Carter trembled. The chant seemed farther away now, but its impact had not diminished. Emily began to cry softly, while Mike clenched his fists, trying to contain his fear. Tommy looked around, looking for some solution. He knew that if they remained in the clearing, they would be completely vulnerable. "We need to move. He'll have to come with us anyway." "He can't even walk," Lena protested. "It doesn't matter. If we stay here, it will find us." Tommy pulled Carter up, throwing his arm over his own shoulders to help him walk. The group began moving again, each step heavier than the last. The air felt thick, as if the room was closing in around them. As they walked, Emily asked, her voice barely audible, "Tommy, do you think it's true that this is the Guardian?" Tommy hesitated before answering. "I don't know what it is, but I know it's not natural. And I know it needs something we still can't understand." Lena approached Tommy. "What if it's not just a legend? If she really is avenging what happened to her? If so, why us?" she asked, her voice breaking. Tommy stopped, staring at Lena. "Because we came here. Because we shouldn't be here." He took a deep breath. "Listen, you need to be strong. We are close to the main road. Just a few more miles, and we'll be out of here." But as Tommy tried to keep the group moving, Carter began to mumble. "She's angry," he said, his eyes wide and fixed on something invisible. "What are you talking about?" asked Tommy, squeezing Carter's arm. "She showed me. She wants everyone to know. She wants them to suffer like she suffered." Carter looked directly at Tommy. "It was him. It was your brother." The statement fell like lightning. Tommy froze, and the group looked at him in shock. "What are you saying?" asked Tommy, trying not to lose his cool. Carter started to laugh, but it was a disturbing, out-of-control laugh. "She said he called her, that he knew what he was doing. He wasn't innocent. And now you're here. You have to pay for it." "That doesn't make sense!" Tommy shouted, forcefully dropping Carter to the ground. Lena and Emily tried to calm him down, but Tommy felt his anger boiling. "That's a lie! He was just a boy. He would never do something like that." But deep down, a doubt began to form. Why had Sam gone to the waterfall alone? He had never liked trails or the forest. And there was something Tommy had never been able to understand. Sam's diary, found days after his disappearance, where he mentioned a secret in the water. Before they could process what was happening, A loud sound made them turn around. It was like a snap, a twig breaking, but much louder, as if something large was moving through the forest. "What was that?" Mike asked, pulling a pocket knife out of his pocket as if he was capable of facing whatever was there. Tommy held up his flashlight, trying to illuminate the darkness between the trees. The beam of light seemed to get lost in the density of the forest. Then they saw her. The figure was there, among the trees. She was no longer a distant shadow. Now it was before them. Her long dark hair fell over her face, partially covering her bright eyes, which seemed to pierce the soul of anyone who looked into them. The skin was pale, almost translucent, and its movements were fluid, as if it were not completely anchored to the ground. "Run!" shouted Tommy. The group sped down the trail, with Tommy helping Carter move as fast as he could, but the terrain seemed to fight against them. The roots of the trees appeared like traps, and the sound of the Guardian followed them closely. It was no longer a melancholic song, but a mixture of lament and anger. Emily tripped and fell, screaming for help. Mike turned to pull her away, but before he could reach her, a pale, skeletal arm emerged from the earth, gripping her ankle tightly. "Help!" Emily shouted, kicking desperately. Mike grabbed her hand and pulled with all the strength he had, managing to free her. But her scream seemed to have alerted the Guardian, who was now closer. Lena pointed to the light of a clearing ahead. "There! The road!" With the last of their strength, the group reached the opening in the forest. The road was there, but they were not alone. Carter fell to his knees in the middle of the road, babbling nonsense. Tommy turned towards the forest, holding a small knife he had on his belt. He knew it was useless, but he couldn't just run away without a fight. The Guardian emerged from the shadows, her form clearer than ever. She didn't look entirely human. His eyes shone brightly, and his mouth formed a distorted smile, as if he was amused by their suffering. She pointed directly at Tommy. "Why did you come back?" she asked, her voice reverberating as if it were coming from all sides. Tommy felt a chill run down his spine. He knew it wouldn't end there. The Guardian's voice seemed to echo inside Tommy's mind, not just around him. The tone was a mixture of pain and fury, something he had never experienced before. The rest of the group was slowly retreating towards the road, but Tommy knew that running away was not an option. "Why did you come back?" repeated the Guardian, taking a step forward. His eyes glowed like two ghostly lanterns, fixed on Tommy. He felt a crushing weight in his chest, as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. But he forced himself to answer. I don't know. I just want answers. I want to understand what happened to my brother." The figure tilted its head, the distorted smile disappearing. For a brief moment he seemed to hesitate. He knew. Her voice was now a cold whisper. He knew what I was, and he still came. Tommy felt a pang of doubt and fear. "That doesn't make sense. Sam was just a boy. He couldn't have done anything to you." The Guardian took another step, the light in her eyes growing brighter. "You humans always think you are innocent. But you bring the pain to this place. You desecrate what should be sacred." His voice became more serious, full of resentment. "He came to me with promises, and broke each one of them." Tommy looked at the group behind him. Carter was still kneeling, muttering to himself. Lena and Emily were paralyzed with fear, and Mike held the switchblade in a shaking hand. They depended on Tommy, but he had no idea how he would face something that was clearly not of this world. "Well, what do you want?" asked Tommy, trying to keep his voice steady. The Guardian stopped, her hair floating as if submerged. "I want justice. I want you to feel what I felt." Before Tommy could react, the surrounding environment changed. He was no longer on the road or in the forest. Instead, I was in a place that seemed out of time, a mix of darkness and water reflections. He was alone with the Guardian. "Where are we?" he asked, looking around. "In the place where it all began. Here, you will see." The Guardian held out her hand, and Tommy saw images projected into the darkness. It was Sam, his younger brother, walking along the trail that led to the waterfall. He seemed anxious, almost desperate. In his hands, he carried something that looked like a small, shiny amulet. "What is that?" Tommy asked. The Guardian ignored the question and continued to show the visions. Sam arrived at the waterfall and, to the sound of the melancholic singing, began to speak. "I know you're here," he shouted, his voice full of emotion. "I need your help." The Guardian's silhouette appeared in the water, exactly as Tommy had seen her. But something was different. She didn't seem hostile. In fact, she seemed curious. "Did you call me?" she asked, her voice soft. Sam nodded. "Yes, please help me. My mother is sick. I've heard stories about you, about how you can heal those who are suffering." The Guardian remained silent for a moment before responding. "There is a price. There is always a price." Sam hesitated, but then held up the amulet. "This is the only gift I have. It's from my family, my mother. Please accept." The Guardian reached out to take the amulet, but as soon as she touched it, something changed. The water around her turned cloudy, and the singing stopped. Her expression changed to something Tommy could only describe as betrayal. "You lied. This object is cursed." His voice became serious, full of anger. Sam backed away, but the Guardian quickly caught up with him, pulling him into the water. Tommy saw his brother's last expression. It wasn't fear, but regret. The vision disappeared, and Tommy came back to the present, panting. "That can't be true. He just wanted to help our mother. He didn't know what he was doing." The Guardian stared at Tommy, her face now filled with pain. "It doesn't matter if he knew or not. He broke the harmony of this place. And now you pay the price for it." "No!" shouted Tommy. "I'm not like him, but if you want revenge, take me. Just let me take the others home. They have nothing to do with it." The Guardian stopped, as if considering the proposal. Finally he said, "Prove it. Show me you understand sacrifice." Tommy felt a huge weight on his chest. He knew he had to do something, but he had no idea how to prove what the Guardian wanted. He looked back at the road where his friends were. Whether they were hearing or seeing what was happening, there was no way of knowing. The world around Tommy felt like an eternal fog, dense and suffocating. He was back in the clearing, but the Guardian still hovered in front of him. His eyes, two lights that seemed alive, watched his every move, as if they were waiting for a decision. Tommy looked at the group. Carter was still muttering disjointed words, completely out of his mind. Emily and Lena were clinging to each other, terrified. Mike tried to hide his fear, but his hand holding the knife was shaking violently. They were young, reckless, but they didn't deserve this. Tommy took a deep breath, gathering all the courage he had. "You want revenge, don't you?" he asked, facing the Guardian. She tilted her head slightly, as if intrigued. "I want balance. I want the pain I felt to be felt by those who dared to deceive me." Tommy stepped forward. "Then take me. I take their place. But let them go." "Tommy, no!" Lena shouted, but he raised his hand to silence her. The Guardian stepped forward, her hair flowing as if moved by an invisible current. "Why would you do that? You're just a human. You always choose yourselves." Tommy looked at her. "Because my brother made a mistake. I can't change him, but I can try to make things right. If that means sacrificing my life to protect theirs, so be it." The Guardian stopped, her eyes shining brighter. For a moment, she seemed to be considering his words. "Your sacrifice can bring balance, but it won't be enough." Her voice reverberated, charged with ancient power. "Someone who is connected to this place must stay." Tommy blinked, confused. "What does that mean?" "They can go," she said, pointing to the group. "But not you. You will be the guardian of this place until the end of time." Her words fell on him like a crushing weight. He would not be killed, but he would be condemned to live there forever, tied to the waterfall, making sure that no one else brought destruction. "What if I refuse?" Tommy asked, his voice shaking slightly. The Guardian smiled, a cold, cruel smile. "Then they will all pay the price." Tommy looked at the group. They were scared, but they also trusted him. It was clear they expected him to save them. He knew what he had to do. "Okay," he finally said. "I accept." As soon as the words left his mouth, the world around him began to change. The fog grew thicker, shrouding everything in silence. The Guardian raised her hand, and a strong wind blew, carrying Lena, Mike, Emily, and Carter away like leaves in the wind. They disappeared, leaving Tommy alone with the Guardian. "Now you understand the sacrifice," she said, her tone almost respectful. "Your life will not be yours, but this place. You will protect this sanctuary and ensure that no one else desecrates it." Tommy felt a huge weight on his shoulders, as if the spirit of the waterfall itself was being placed upon him. The Guardian took a step back, slowly disappearing into the mist, but her voice echoed one last time. "You are not alone. I will be here, always." When everything calmed down, Tommy looked around. He was still in the clearing, but something had changed. The waterfall felt more alive, like it was part of him now. He knew his life would never be the same again. Far away, Lena, Emily, Mike, and Carter reappeared at the trailhead, confused and dazed. Carter, finally recovered, looked around, looking for Tommy. "Where is he?" Lena began to cry, while Emily hugged her knees, shaking. Mike placed his hand on Carter's shoulder. "He saved us," and stayed there. The group left the place in silence, taking with them the weight of what they had experienced. They knew they could never go back, nor tell anyone what really happened. The forest around Forgotten Waterfall looked different now. The air, once charged with tension, was strangely calm. Tommy remained in the clearing, his mind processing the enormity of what had happened. He was no longer just a man. Now I was connected to that place in a way I didn't fully understand. He walked to the edge of the waterfall, watching his reflection in the crystal-clear water. The image staring back at him was no longer familiar. Her eyes, once ordinary brown, now glowed with a pale shade similar to the Guardian's. He felt the weight of his new responsibility to protect the waterfall and prevent others from sharing its fate. Days later, Lena, Mike, Emily, and Carter were gathered at the Mill Creek Cafe, trying to recover from the trauma. The small town, indifferent to what they had faced, continued its leisurely pace. But they knew they could never forget what they had experienced. Lena looked at the untouched coffee in front of her. "He sacrificed himself for us," she said, her voice low and full of guilt. Mike shook his head, staring at the table. "We should never have gone," he warned. Carter, his face still marked by the experience, finally spoke. "We can't tell anyone about this. They would never understand." Emily looked up with watery eyes. "What about his family? What do we say?" The group fell silent, unable to respond. Ultimately, they decided to keep the story simple. Tommy had disappeared during an expedition, like so many people before him. It was a lie that would weigh on them forever. Meanwhile, in the clearing, Tommy was slowly discovering the meaning of his new existence. He felt the Guardian's presence everywhere, like a constant shadow. She didn't speak, but he knew she was there, watching. He began to notice changes in himself. Hunger and thirst disappeared, and time seemed to flow differently. Days and nights passed by in a blur, but he didn't feel tired. He wandered the trail, guided by an instinct he didn't fully understand. Then, one afternoon, he heard footsteps at the trailhead. A group of tourists, just like the ones he had guided before, were approaching. The leader, a young man full of arrogance, laughed loudly as he pointed to a crumpled map. Tommy knew what he needed to do. He appeared on the path, his silhouette now imposing and full of authority. "You shouldn't be here." The group stopped, scared. "Who are you?" asked the leader. Tommy didn't respond. He just took a step forward, and something in his presence made them step back. "This place is not safe. Leave now, and don't come back." The group hesitated, but the intensity in Tommy's gaze convinced them. They backed away slowly, heading back to where they had come. When they disappeared into the forest, Tommy felt a brief relief. "But I knew others would come. They always came." Humans were drawn to mystery, unable to resist the promise of something unknown. His task now was to protect them from themselves and to protect the waterfall from further destruction. In the village of Mill Creek, Tommy's story has become more of a legend, added to the region's folklore. But to Lena, Mike, Emily, and Carter, he was more than a memory. He was a hero, a man who paid the price so they could live. At the end, as Tommy looked at the waterfall in the moonlight, he heard the Guardian's voice again, this time soft, almost compassionate. "You kept your promise. Now, we are one." And so, Tommy accepted his fate, knowing that his life had turned into something much greater than he ever imagined. The years passed, but Tommy no longer had a clear sense of time. The forest around Forgotten Waterfall changed in subtle ways. Trees grew denser, ancient trails disappeared beneath vegetation, and human presence became increasingly rare. Mill Creek, the town that Tommy once called home, has begun to lose its population, with young people leaving to seek opportunities in larger cities. The legend of the Guardian, now with the figure of a mysterious guardian who prevented visitors, gained strength among the few remaining residents. For Lena, Mike, Emily, and Carter, Tommy's story never stopped being a weight they carried. Each one followed different paths, but the experience at the waterfall marked them in irreversible ways. Lena left Mill Creek shortly after the incident, but was never able to forget Tommy. She began researching legends and supernatural stories, determined to understand what really happened at the waterfall. Her studies led to an interest in environmental preservation, and she dedicated her life to protecting natural areas from invaders. In every forest she visited, she saw a reflection of Tommy, sacrificing himself to protect what others didn't understand. One night, years later, Lena returned to Mill Creek on a solitary trip. The city was almost deserted, with closed stores and streets covered in leaves. She followed the Forgotten Waterfall trail, now closed with warning signs. Ignoring them, he walked to the clearing where Tommy made his choice. "Tommy," she whispered into the void, feeling her heart heavy. "I hope you are at peace." But peace was something Tommy would never fully have. Tommy became part of the waterfall in a literal way. He felt every movement in the water, every breath of wind through the trees. Over time, his physical presence began to change. Her eyes glowed with the same intensity as the Guardian's, and her skin took on an ethereal tone, reflecting the moonlight like the crystal-clear water of the lagoon. He began to understand the Guardian's thoughts. Although still resentful of humanity, there was a trace of compassion on it, as if trying to teach Tommy something greater. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her words were loaded with meaning. "Do you protect them because you still believe them?" she asked once, as they watched distant tourists lost on the path of the forest. Tommy responded after a long silence, "Because if I give up, who will protect them from themselves?" The Guardian didn't answer, but for the first time, he thought he saw something like a smile on his lips. Meanwhile, Carter never surpassed events in the waterfall. He became a prisoner, avoiding human contact whenever he could. But in its isolation, it began to draw compulsively. His work showed the Guardian and Tommy as mythical figures, surrounded by the mist of the forest. One day, driven by something he didn't even understand himself, Carter decided to return to Mill Creek. He needed to face what had happened. He knew that somehow Tommy was still there. Upon arriving at the clearing, he found himself face to face with his old friend. Tommy no longer looked human. His eyes shone like headlights, and his body emanated a calm but powerful energy. "Tommy, is you?" Carter asked, his trembling voice. "Carter, you shouldn't be here." Tommy's voice was deeper, reverberating the sound of the waterfall. Carter fell to his knees, tears running down his face. "I'm very sorry, I should have heard you." Tommy watched him for a long time before he answered, "You are alive. Use this to change. Go, and never come back." Carter hesitated, but finally got up and returned on the trail. It was the last time he saw Tommy. Over the years, the Forgotten Waterfall has become inaccessible for almost everyone. Those who tried to enter the forest were deteriorated by an inexplicable feeling of fear as if something or someone was protecting the place. The few people still lived in Mill Creek spoke of Tommy as a hero and a curse. But in their hearts they knew that he had done something great. He sacrificed everything to preserve balance. In the end, Tommy accepted his role. He no longer felt the weight of loss or sacrifice. I just felt one purpose. He protected the waterfall and guaranteed that the Guardian never suffered the pain that led her to revenge. On the last night of the fall, while the full moon illuminated the waterfall, Tommy stood on the edge of the water. For the first time in years, he felt something like peace. The Guardian's voice came up again, smooth and almost kind. Maybe one day you are free, but until then, this is your place. And under the brightness of the moon and the eternal sound of water, Tommy remained, a guardian between worlds, remembered only in the stories of those who dare to get too close. What did you think of this outcome? Leave your opinion in the comments. We love to know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like to support our work. See you in the next video.